A mysterious encounter. James adjusted the strap of his backpack as he wandered deeper into the alien ruins. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of damp stone, and his boots crunched softly against the moss-covered floor. Towering spires and shattered walls rose around him, remnants of a civilization long forgotten by time. Despite the eerie silence, James felt a strange pull to explore further, as if the ruins were calling out to him. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows that danced across the ancient carvings on the walls. Symbols and patterns, unlike anything James had ever seen, seemed to glow faintly in the fading light. He paused to trace a particularly intricate design with his fingers. A chill ran through him, though he couldn't tell if it was from the cold or the odd sense of familiarity the place gave him. Then he felt it. A prickling sensation crawled up his neck, and the hair on his arms stood on end. He froze. Someone, or something, was watching him. Slowly he turned, scanning the ruins for any sign of movement. At first, there was nothing but the wind whispering through the broken stones. But then he saw her. A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping hesitantly into the soft orange light of the setting sun. She was tall and graceful, with skin that shimmered faintly like polished silver. Her large, almond-shaped eyes glowed softly, reflecting the light as they locked onto James. Her features were delicate and alien, yet there was something strangely human in the way her expression softened as she looked at him. James took an involuntary step back, his heart pounding in his chest. Who are you?" he managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. The alien woman didn't respond at first. She stood still, her hands trembling at her sides. Her glowing eyes seemed to drink in every detail of James' face, as if she were seeing something impossible. Then, to his shock, her eyes filled with tears. A single droplet slid down her cheek and shimmered in the dim light. "You?" she whispered, her voice melodic but filled with raw emotion. "It's you." James frowned, confusion battling with unease. "Me? Do I know you?" She shook her head, but the tears continued to flow. "No, not you. But you look just like him." Her voice broke, and she took a step closer, her gaze never leaving his face. James instinctively raised his hands, unsure whether to keep his distance or offer comfort. "Wait, slow down. Who do I look like? What's going on?" The alien woman hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "A promise," she said finally, her voice trembling. "A promise made long ago. You carry his face. His legacy." James' confusion deepened. "Legacy? What are you talking about? I don't understand." Instead of answering, the alien woman reached out, her silver fingers brushing lightly against the edge of his sleeve. James flinched at the coolness of her touch, but didn't pull away. Her tears continued to fall, and her gaze turned to the tattoos peeking out from his arm, a pattern his grandfather had once called a family symbol. Her breath hitched. "It's true," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "The markings, just like his." James stepped back, his heart racing. "How do you know about these? Who are you talking about?" The woman lowered her hand, her expression a mixture of sorrow and wonder. "His name was William," she said, her voice breaking. He saved me. He saved my people." James froze. That name sent a jolt through him. "William, my grandfather," he said, his voice barely audible. "That's impossible. He never left Earth." The alien woman shook her head, her gaze unwavering. "He did. He came here. And he gave everything. For us." James stared at her, his mind reeling. This couldn't be real. His grandfather was a simple man, a farmer who told tall tales to entertain his grandchildren. But the way this alien woman looked at him, the tears in her eyes, it felt too real to be a lie. "What do you mean he gave everything?" James asked, his voice firmer now. He needed answers. She hesitated, as if the memory was too painful to revisit. He stayed when no one else would. He fought when no one else could. He gave me hope when I had none. And now you stand before me, his blood, his legacy. It's almost too much. James felt a chill sweep over him. He had come to these ruins out of curiosity, seeking adventure, maybe even a little treasure. But now it felt like the ruins were alive, like they had been waiting for him all along. And this alien woman, she seemed to think he was part of a story he didn't even know. The wind picked up, carrying a mournful hum through the ruins. The alien woman wiped her tears and straightened, her voice steady now. "There's something you need to see," she said softly. "Something only you can unlock." James hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to turn and leave. But something deeper, something he couldn't explain, urged him to stay. "All right," he said, his voice barely steady. "Show me." The alien woman nodded, her glowing eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sorrow. "Follow me." And with that, she turned and began to walk deeper into the ruins, leaving James to decide whether to follow her into the unknown. Unraveling the mystery. James followed the alien woman deeper into the ruins, his thoughts a chaotic swirl. The woman's tears, her mention of his grandfather, and her cryptic words about a legacy left him, feeling both intrigued and unsettled. The ruins, already ancient and imposing, now seemed alive with secrets waiting to be uncovered. The path wound through towering columns covered in glowing symbols. James noticed they pulsed faintly when the woman passed by, as if recognizing her presence. She walked with a mixture of grace and hesitation, frequently glancing back at him as if afraid he might vanish. Her silence was unnerving, but James didn't press her, yet. Finally, they reached a large chamber, its walls shimmering with light reflected off a central pool of liquid silver. Above it, a crystalline structure floated, humming softly. The air felt charged, like a storm was brewing just beneath the surface. The woman stopped and turned to face James, her glowing eyes studying him intently. "Do you know where you are, human?" she asked, her voice soft but resonating with a strange power. James shook his head. "Some ruins on a forgotten planet," he replied, his tone guarded. "You tell me." "This place is sacred," she said, her voice tinged with reverence. "It is the heart of the Avarin, my people. Once it was vibrant, alive with the energy of thousands. Now, it's all that remains." James looked around, trying to imagine the ruins as a bustling city. It seemed impossible. "What happened?" he asked. "Why is it like this?" She stepped closer, her silvery skin catching the light. "War, greed, betrayal. The same things that destroy so many worlds. But there was a moment, a chance to save us. And it came from someone like you." James frowned. "You mean my grandfather?" She nodded. "William. He came to us in our darkest hour. We were on the brink of extinction, hunted by a relentless enemy. Your grandfather was the first human we had ever encountered. At first, we feared him, but he proved to be more than we could have imagined." James crossed his arms, skepticism creeping into his voice. "You're telling me my grandfather somehow saved an entire race of aliens? I don't buy it. He was a farmer, not some kind of hero." The woman's expression softened, and she gestured toward the floating crystal. "See for yourself." Before James could question her, the crystal emitted a beam of light that engulfed him. The room dissolved, replaced by a vivid vision. He saw a younger version of his grandfather standing in a field of flames, holding a strange device, while alien ships loomed overhead. William's voice echoed, filled with determination. "I made a promise to protect them," the voice said, "no matter the cost." The vision shifted. James saw William standing beside the alien woman, Lyra, shielding her with his body as enemy forces advanced. His grandfather's face was weathered, his eyes fierce. He fought with a desperation James had never seen in the man he remembered. When the vision ended, James staggered, his mind reeling. The ruins came back into focus, and Lyra was watching him, tears glistening in her eyes. "It's true," she said softly. "He saved us, but in doing so, he made a choice that no one else would. He stayed behind to ensure we survived, knowing it meant he would never return to his own world." James stared at her, his throat dry. Why didn't he come back? Why didn't he tell anyone? Lyra's gaze dropped. Because he couldn't. The device he activated to save us bound him to this place. His sacrifice allowed the heart to shield us from our enemies. Without him, we would have been lost. James ran a hand through his hair, trying to process it all. "And what does this have to do with me?" Lyra stepped closer, her voice trembling. "The heart recognized you the moment you entered this place. It responded to your blood, your connection to him. You are the key to awakening it again, James, to restoring what was lost." He backed away, shaking his head. "I didn't sign up for this. I came here to explore, not to carry on some legacy I didn't even know existed." Lyra reached out, her hand hovering near his arm, but not touching him. "I understand your fear. But if you leave now, everything you fought for will be for nothing. Our people are still vulnerable. The enemy has not forgotten us." James closed his eyes, his grandfather's voice from the vision echoing in his mind, no matter the cost. When he opened them, Lyra was watching him with a mixture of hope and sorrow. "Please," she whispered, "help us. You are our last hope." James took a deep breath, his mind racing. He didn't know if he could live up to his grandfather's legacy, but one thing was clear. He couldn't walk away. Not yet. "Show me what I need to do," he said finally, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Lyra's expression softened, and for the first time, a faint smile touched her lips. "Thank you, James. You're braver than you know." As the chamber began to hum with renewed energy, James couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far greater than himself. The lost connection. The chamber buzzed faintly with energy, the floating crystal pulsating in time with James' uneasy heartbeat. As he stood near the pool of silvery liquid, he couldn't shake the vivid images of his grandfather that the vision had revealed. A farmer turned hero, a man who sacrificed everything for a species James had never even known existed. The weight of it all settled heavily on his shoulders. Lyra moved to the edge of the pool, her delicate features illuminated by its glow. "This place holds more than memories," she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. "It holds the truth of what your grandfather believed in, and the truth of what we must now face." James followed her gaze to the glowing symbols on the walls, their intricate patterns shifting subtly as if alive. "What do you mean by what we must face?" "You're talking about the enemy that attacked your people." Lyra nodded, her expression grim. "The Varnaks. They are relentless hunters, drawn to power and conquest. They nearly wiped us out centuries ago. If it hadn't been for William's intervention, none of us would have survived. But now, they've returned, stronger and more determined than ever." James frowned. "Why come back now? After all this time?" Her gaze locked onto his, filled with both sorrow and urgency, "Because they know the heart of the Avaran has grown weak. Its power is fading, and with it, our ability to hide. When you arrived and activated the crystal, it sent out a signal, a beacon that the Varnaks will not ignore." James cursed under his breath. "So, me coming here just put a target on your back." "It was inevitable," she replied, her tone gentle but resolute. "But your arrival also brought hope. You carry the same blood that awakened the heart all those years ago. You can restore its strength." James stared at her, frustration bubbling to the surface. "You keep saying that like it's a simple fix. But I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. I'm not some warrior or hero. I'm just me." Lyra took a step closer, her glowing eyes softening. "Neither was William when he first arrived. He was scared, uncertain, just like you. But he chose to act. He chose to trust in something greater than himself." James shook his head, pacing along the edge of the chamber. "That's not exactly comforting. You're asking me to risk everything for a cause I don't even fully understand." Lyra hesitated, then reached out, her hand brushing lightly against his arm. Her touch was cool, but it carried a strange warmth that made James pause. "Let me show you," she said. "Let me help you understand." Before he could respond, the pool of liquid silver began to ripple, its surface glowing brighter. Lyra stepped forward, motioning for James to follow. Reluctantly, he approached the edge, watching as the liquid formed swirling patterns that mirrored the symbols on the walls. "This is the memory pool," Lyra explained. "It holds the collective knowledge of my people, preserved by the heart. If you open yourself to it, you can see what we've endured. You can see why your grandfather made his choice." James eyed the glowing liquid warily. "And what happens if I do? Is this going to mess with my head?" Lyra gave a faint smile. "It will only show you what you're willing to see. The rest is up to you." Taking a deep breath, James knelt beside the pool, his reflection shimmering in its surface. "All right," he said. "Let's do this." As he placed his hand in the liquid, a surge of warmth spread through his arm. His vision blurred, and the chamber dissolved around him. In its place, he saw a vibrant world, teeming with life. Towers of crystal rose into a sky painted with swirling auroras, and beings like Lyra moved gracefully among them. But the beauty was short-lived. The scene shifted to chaos. Alien ships raining fire from above, the ground splintering under the force of explosions. James felt the fear and desperation of the Avaran people as they fled for their lives, their once thriving city reduced to ruins. Amid the chaos, he saw William again. His grandfather stood at the center of it all, holding the artifact that James had activated earlier. His face was lined with determination as he faced the advancing enemy. Beside him stood a younger Lyra, her eyes wide with fear. "This is our only chance," William's voice echoed. "If this works, they'll never find you again." "But you'll be trapped here," Lyra protested. "You'll never see your family again." William smiled faintly. "Family isn't just blood. It's who you fight for, who you protect. And right now, you're my family." The vision shifted again, showing William activating the artifact. A brilliant light engulfed the battlefield, driving the enemy back. But as the light faded, William fell to his knees, his strength drained. The artifact had saved the Avaran people, but at a terrible cost. His life was now tied to the heart, ensuring its power would endure as long as he remained. James pulled his hand from the memory pool, gasping for breath. The chamber returned to focus, and Lyra was watching him with a mixture of sympathy and hope. "Do you see now?" she asked softly. "This is why we need you. The heart was never meant to rely on one person alone. It was meant to pass from one protector to the next." James rubbed his temples, the weight of the memories pressing down on him. "And now it's my turn," he muttered. "What happens if I say no?" Lyra's expression darkened. "Then the Varnax will come, and there will be no one left to stop them." James sighed, his mind racing. He had never asked for this responsibility, but as he looked into Lyra's eyes, he saw the same hope that had driven his grandfather all those years ago, and for the first time, he wondered if he might have the strength to do what needed to be done. "All right," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'll do it, but you're going to have to guide me every step of the way." Lyra nodded, her smile faint but genuine. "You have my word. Together, we will protect what remains." As the heart pulsed with renewed energy, James knew there was no turning back. The fight was only just beginning. The truth behind the tears. The chamber hummed softly as James stood in silence, still reeling from the memories he had just witnessed in the memory pool. The vision of his grandfather's sacrifice played over and over in his mind. A man who had risked everything to protect a species he barely knew. James clenched his fists, struggling to reconcile the farmer he remembered with the hero the Avaran people revered. Lyra moved to his side, her presence calming but heavy with unspoken emotion. "You've seen what he gave for us," she said softly. "But there's something more you need to know." James glanced at her, wary. "More? What else could there be?" "I just saw him give up his life for your people." Lyra's glowing eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw guilt mingled with her sorrow. "Because it wasn't just for us. He saved me, personally, and I've carried that weight ever since." James frowned. "What do you mean? He saved everyone, didn't he?" She nodded, hesitating before speaking. "Yes, but I was the reason he stayed behind. The Varnaks were after me. They believed I held the key to activating the heart of the Avaran. They would stop at nothing to capture me. Your grandfather saw that, and he made a choice." James's stomach tightened. "What kind of choice?" Lyra's voice grew quieter, almost a whisper. "The Varnaks offered him a deal. If he handed me over, they would leave the rest of my people alone. They promised to spare the city if I became their prisoner." James's jaw clenched, and he refused. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. He refused. He told them that no life was worth trading for another. He chose to fight, knowing it would cost him everything. James let out a slow breath, his mind racing. He looked at Lyra, her expression filled with pain and gratitude. "You think it was your fault, don't you?" he asked. She looked away, her silver skin shimmering faintly in the light of the floating crystal. "Every day, I wonder if he made the right choice, if my survival was worth his sacrifice. I've carried that question for decades, watching my people struggle to rebuild while the memory of William haunted me." James crossed his arms, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner? Why let me think he did it for some noble cause when it was about protecting you?" Lyra's gaze snapped back to him, her voice firm despite her tears. "It was a noble cause, James. He didn't just save me. He saved what I represent. The heart would have been lost without me. Your grandfather understood that. He saw the bigger picture." James opened his mouth to argue but stopped. Her words hit him harder than he expected. The bigger picture. Wasn't that what his grandfather had always talked about when he was alive? Helping others, looking out for those in need, even when it wasn't easy. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "So, what now? You said the heart's power is fading. What does that mean for your people?" Lyra stepped closer, her expression grave. "It means we're running out of time. The heart was never meant to sustain itself forever. It needs a new connection, a new source of energy to keep it alive. That's where you come in." James stiffened. "Me? How am I supposed to do that? I'm not some mystical warrior or chosen one. I'm just a guy who stumbled onto this place." Lyra gave him a faint smile. "You're more than that, James. You carry William's blood, his courage. The heart recognized you the moment you entered this place. It's why the crystal responded to you." James glanced at the floating crystal, its gentle hum now seeming almost alive. "And what happens if I connect with the heart? Do I end up stuck here forever, like my grandfather?" Lyra hesitated, her silence answering more than her words could. "It's not the same as what he did," she said carefully. "The bond is different now. The heart doesn't require a life sacrifice to sustain it, only a part of your essence. Your memories, your emotions, it needs your humanity." James's brow furrowed. "My humanity? What does that even mean?" She gestured toward the glowing symbols on the walls. "The heart thrives on the connections we make, the bonds we share. Your grandfather's compassion, his willingness to sacrifice, gave it the strength to protect us for decades. But now, it needs more. It needs someone who understands the value of life, who can bridge the gap between our people and yours." James shook his head, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "You're asking me to give up who I am." "No," Lyra said firmly. "I'm asking you to become more than you are, to carry on what your grandfather started, to give us a chance to survive." James looked away, his mind a storm of doubt and fear. He had spent his whole life avoiding responsibility, drifting from one adventure to the next without any real purpose. But now, standing in the ruins of a once great civilization, he felt something stir inside him, a flicker of the same courage his grandfather must have felt all those years ago. Lyra stepped closer, her voice softening. "I know it's a lot to ask, but I believe in you, James, just as I believed in William." He met her gaze, her glowing eyes filled with hope and determination. For the first time, he saw not just an alien, but someone who had endured unimaginable loss and still found the strength to fight for her people. James took a deep breath, the weight of his decision settling over him. "All right," he said quietly. "If this is what I'm meant to do, then I'll do it. But I'm going to need your help." Lyra's expression softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You won't be alone," she said. "Together, we'll ensure his sacrifice wasn't in vain." As the chamber brightened, the symbols on the walls glowing with renewed energy, James felt a strange sense of clarity. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he was ready to face it. A new threat emerges. The ruins vibrated with a low rhythmic hum as the heart of the Avaran pulsed with renewed energy. James stood in the chamber, his resolve firm but his mind spinning with questions. He had agreed to help, to carry on his grandfather's legacy, but the enormity of the task weighed heavily on him. Beside him, Lyra moved with purpose, her glowing eyes scanning the ancient symbols that now illuminated the walls. As James opened his mouth to ask what came next, the chamber shuddered violently, sending dust and fragments of stone raining from the ceiling. The glow of the heart dimmed momentarily, and Lyra's expression darkened. "They found us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. James tensed. "The Varnax." Lyra nodded, her hands moving quickly over a console embedded in the wall. The symbols shifted under her touch, forming a holographic map that displayed the surrounding area. Red markers blinked ominously, closing in on their location. "They must have intercepted the signal when you activated the crystal," she explained. "I hoped we had more time, but they're faster than I anticipated." James's heart raced as he stared at the map. "How many are we talking about?" Lyra's expression was grim, enough to destroy what remains of the heart. "And us." The ground shuddered again, and a distant roar echoed through the ruins. James instinctively reached for the small survival knife strapped to his belt, the only weapon he had brought with him. It felt laughably inadequate in the face of an alien invasion. "We can't fight them head-on," Lyra said, turning to him. "The heart must be protected at all costs. If they destroy it, everything your grandfather fought for will be lost." James swallowed hard, adrenaline surging through him. "So what's the plan? Hide and hope they don't find us?" Lyra shook her head, her expression resolute. "No, we fight strategically. The heart's energy field can be redirected to create barriers and traps within the ruins, but it will require precise coordination." "And you?" "Me?" James asked, his voice rising. "What am I supposed to do? I don't know how to work alien tech." "You don't have to," Lyra said, stepping closer. "The heart recognizes you. Your presence alone amplifies its power. I can guide you, but you must trust me." Before James could respond, another explosion rocked the chamber. This time, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors. The Varnax were close. Lyra grabbed his arm, her grip firm. "Come on. We need to move." They sprinted through the winding passageways of the ruins, the dim light of the heart guiding their way. James could hear the unmistakable metallic clank of the Varnax's armored boots growing louder behind them. His heart pounded in his chest, each step feeling heavier than the last. As they rounded a corner, Lyra stopped abruptly, raising her hand. "Here," she said, pointing to a massive, circular platform embedded in the floor. "This is an energy node. If we activate it, we can block their path." James hesitated, his gaze darting between Lyra and the platform. "What do I do?" "Stand in the center," Lyra instructed. "The heart will do the rest." James stepped onto the platform, his palms sweating. The moment he reached the center, The symbols on the walls flared to life, and a surge of energy shot through him. He gasped as the platform began to hum, the air around him crackling with electricity. Lyra worked quickly, her hands moving over a nearby console. "Focus," she called out. "Think about protecting this place. The heart will respond to your intent." James closed his eyes, his mind racing. He thought about his grandfather, standing in this same place decades ago, making the ultimate sacrifice to save these people. He thought about the ruins, the Avaran race, and the fragile hope that clung to this ancient place. The platform glowed brighter, and a translucent barrier rose from the ground, sealing the corridor behind them. Moments later, the sound of heavy impacts echoed through the ruins as the Varnax tried to break through. "It worked," Lyra said, her voice filled with relief. "But it won't hold them for long. We need to keep moving." James stepped off the platform, his legs shaky. "How many of these nodes are there?" "3," Lyra replied, leading him down another corridor. "If we can activate all of them, we'll create a perimeter strong enough to repel the Varnax, at least temporarily." James nodded, determination hardening his resolve. "Let's do it." They moved quickly, the ruins trembling with each explosion as the Varnax continued their assault. At the second node, James repeated the process, the energy coursing through him like a living force. Each time, the connection to the heart grew stronger, the symbols on his grandfather's tattoos glowing faintly on his arm. By the time they reached the third node, James was exhausted, his body aching from the strain. Lyra helped him onto the platform, her voice calm but urgent. "This is the last one. After this, we'll have enough time to prepare for the next phase." James gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stand. The platform hummed beneath him, and the energy surged once more. But this time, something felt different. The connection was deeper, more intense. Images flashed through his mind. Visions of the Avaran city before its fall, of his grandfather standing defiant against the Varnax, and of Lyra, younger and more vulnerable, clinging to hope. As the final barrier rose, James collapsed to his knees, breathing heavily. Lyra knelt beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. "You've given us a fighting chance." James looked up at her, his vision blurry. "What now?" Lyra's expression hardened, determination gleaming in her eyes. "Now we prepare for the battle ahead, and we show the Varnax that the heart of the Avaran is not so easily destroyed." The bond of trust. The ruins were silent now, save for the low hum of the barriers James had helped activate. The translucent walls shimmered faintly, holding back the relentless advance of the Varnax. James sat slumped against a stone pillar, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His body ached from the strain of connecting to the heart, and his mind felt like it had run a marathon. Lyra knelt beside him, her glowing eyes filled with concern. "You've done more than I could have asked," she said softly, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "But the hardest part is still ahead." James managed a weak laugh, harder than channeling an ancient alien power and outrunning a bunch of armored killers. "Great." Lyra's lips curved into a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The barriers won't hold forever. The Varnax will adapt, as they always do. Our only chance to end this is to strike first, before they break through." James straightened, wincing at the pain in his muscles. "Strike first? You mean fight them?" Lyra nodded. "The heart's energy can be used offensively, but only if the connection is strong enough. That connection is you, James." He groaned, rubbing his temples. "Why does it always come back to me? I'm just one guy. How am I supposed to take on an entire army?" "You're not alone," Lyra said firmly. "The heart responds to trust, to unity. If we work together, it will amplify our strength." James looked at her skeptically. "You're saying we can take down an entire Varnax assault force by bonding?" Lyra hesitated, her gaze dropping to the glowing tattoos on his arm. "It's not just about bonding. It's about sharing. The heart thrives on connection. If you and I align our intentions, our emotions, it can channel that power into something far greater than either of us alone. James frowned. And what does that mean exactly? What kind of connection are we talking about? She met his gaze, her expression serious. It means opening yourself completely. No walls, no secrets. The heart will bind us. Share our memories, our fears, our hopes. It's intimate, and it's not easy. James's stomach twisted. The idea of someone, anyone, seeing his deepest thoughts was unsettling. "You've done this before?" he asked. Lyra shook her head. "Not like this. The last time the heart formed a bond this strong was with your grandfather. He trusted me. I trusted him. And that trust saved my people." James looked away, the weight of her words sinking in. Trust. It wasn't something he gave easily, especially not to someone he'd just met, alien or not. But as he thought about his grandfather, standing against the Varnaks with nothing but determination and hope, he felt a flicker of courage. "How do we do it?" he asked finally, his voice low but steady. Lyra's expression softened. "We focus. Together. The heart will guide us." She stood and offered him her hand. After a moment's hesitation, James took it. Her skin was cool to the touch, but there was a strange warmth in the connection, as if her presence steadied him. They stepped onto the central platform, the glowing crystal hovering above them. The air around them crackled with energy, and James felt the familiar hum of the heart resonating in his chest. "Close your eyes," Lyra said, "and let go of your fears." James hesitated but obeyed. He took a deep breath, letting the tension in his body melt away. As he focused on the hum of the heart, he felt a strange pull, as if invisible threads were weaving between him and Lyra. The connection hit him like a wave. Images flooded his mind. Lyra as a child, running through vibrant fields under a sky filled with auroras. Her joy as she learned to harness the heart's energy for the first time. Her fear as the Varnak ships descended, their weapons tearing through her home. Her guilt, raw and consuming, as she watched his grandfather sacrifice himself to save her. And then her hope, a fragile, flickering light that had burned for decades, waiting for someone to reignite it. James felt a lump rise in his throat. For all her strength, Lyra carried a burden as heavy as his own. He opened his eyes, and their gazes met, the connection between them palpable. "I see you," he said quietly, his voice trembling. "I get it now." Lyra smiled, her tears shimmering like stars. "And I see you, James. You're stronger than you realize." The heart's energy surged, and the chamber filled with blinding light. James felt power coursing through him, not like before, but deeper, more controlled. He and Lyra moved as one, their minds and hearts aligned. The barriers around the ruins shimmered, transforming into beams of concentrated energy that shot outward. The distant sound of Varnak's machinery grinding to a halt echoed through the ruins, followed by an otherworldly screech as their forces were repelled. When the light faded, the chamber was silent once more. James staggered, but Lyra caught him, her grip steady. "It worked," she said, her voice filled with quiet awe. "We did it." James looked at her, exhaustion and relief washing over him. "What now?" Lyra's expression hardened, though her eyes were kind. "Now we prepare for the final confrontation. The Varnaks will regroup, and when they do, we'll need to end this once and for all." James nodded, his resolve solidifying. He had started this journey as a reluctant traveler, but now he was something more. He wasn't just carrying his grandfather's legacy. He was forging his own. "Let's finish this," he said, his voice steady. Lyra smiled, her hand tightening on his shoulder. Together. The heart pulsed again, its energy a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. And for the first time, James felt ready to face whatever came next. Sacrifice and resolution. The ruins pulsed with a quiet intensity, the hearts glow brighter and steadier than before. James and Lyra stood together in the central chamber, their breaths steady despite the storm brewing outside. The barriers they had raised still held, but the Varnacs were relentless. Every shudder of the ruins was a grim reminder that the enemy would soon adapt and break through. Lyra turned to James, her glowing eyes filled with both determination and worry. "We don't have much time. The heart can protect us, but it can't fight for us. We need to take the fight to them." James nodded, the connection they had forged earlier still thrumming faintly in his chest. He could feel her emotions, her fear, her hope, her unyielding resolve, and he knew she could feel his. They were bonded now, their fates intertwined. "What's the plan?" James asked, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. Lyra gestured to the central crystal hovering above the platform. "The heart's energy can be channeled into a weapon, something powerful enough to disable the Varnac's mothership. But it will require both of us to focus, to direct its power. And—" She hesitated, looking away. James frowned. "And what?" She took a deep breath. "The energy surge will draw the Varnacs directly to us. They'll stop at nothing to destroy the heart once they realize what we're doing. So we'll have to hold them off while channeling the energy," James said, piecing it together. "Sounds like a death sentence." "It might be," Lyra admitted, her voice quiet. "But if we don't try, the heart will fall, and with it, my people's last hope." James looked at her, his chest tightening. He had come to this place as a reluctant adventurer, someone searching for excitement and escape. But now, standing on the precipice of something far greater, he realized that his grandfather's legacy wasn't just about sacrifice. It was about purpose. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "Let's do it. If we're going out fighting." Lyra's lips curved into a faint smile, and she reached out, her hand brushing against his. "Thank you, James. I'm honored to stand beside you." The chamber trembled as another explosion echoed through the ruins. Lyra moved to the console, her fingers flying over the controls as symbols rearranged themselves into intricate patterns. The crystal above the platform began to spin, its glow intensifying. "Stand in the center," she instructed. "Focus on the heart. Let it guide you." James stepped onto the platform, the familiar hum of the heart resonating through him. He closed his eyes, allowing the energy to flow freely. Images flooded his mind. Visions of his grandfather, of Lyra's people rebuilding, of the Varnacs advancing with cold, relentless precision. The heart's power surged, and James felt it aligning with his thoughts, his emotions. He could sense Lyra beside him, her presence steady and unwavering. Together, they directed the energy outward, aiming for the massive Varnac's mothership that loomed above the ruins. Outside, the Varnac's forces redoubled their assault, their weapons battering the barriers. The sound of their approach grew louder, closer, until it felt as if they were just outside the chamber. James's muscles tensed, his focus wavering. "They're breaking through," he shouted. "I know," Lyra replied, her voice tight. "Just a little longer." Suddenly, the barriers gave way, and the Varnacs stormed into the ruins. Their towering forms gleamed with metallic armor, their weapons glowing ominously. They advanced with mechanical precision, their cold, insect-like eyes locking onto the heart. James opened his eyes, his pulse racing. "Lyra, they're here." She nodded, her expression fierce. "Hold them off. I'll stabilize the heart." James grabbed a broken piece of stone and hurled it at the nearest Varnac soldier, drawing its attention. The creature hissed and lunged, its bladed arms slicing through the air. James ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding the attack. He grabbed a fallen weapon from the ground, something alien and unfamiliar, and aimed it at the advancing enemy. To his surprise, the weapon fired a burst of energy, knocking the Varnacs back. "Not bad," he muttered, gripping the weapon tightly. "Let's see what else you've got." The chamber descended into chaos as James fought to keep the Varnacs at bay. He moved with a precision he didn't know he possessed, the bond with the heart sharpening his reflexes and guiding his movements. For every Varnax he struck down, another seemed to take its place, but he refused to back down. Meanwhile, Lyra stood at the console, her hands glowing with energy as she channeled the heart's power. The crystal above them pulsed brighter and brighter, its light filling the chamber. The ground shook violently, and cracks spread along the walls as the heart reached the peak of its energy. "James," Lyra shouted, "it's ready. But you need to focus with me. Now." James turned, his chest heaving as he sprinted back to the platform. He leaped onto it, ignoring the searing pain in his legs and the shouts of the advancing Varnax. He closed his eyes, reaching out with his mind to the heart. The connection was instantaneous. The energy surged through him, merging with Lyra's, their thoughts and emotions intertwining. Together, they directed the heart's power upward, aiming for the mothership that loomed like a shadow over the ruins. The chamber filled with blinding light as the heart unleashed its energy. A massive beam shot skyward, piercing through the mothership with devastating force. The Varnax screamed as their systems failed, their soldiers collapsing lifelessly to the ground. When the light faded, the chamber was silent. The mothership had been destroyed, its remains scattered across the sky like falling stars. James collapsed to his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion. Lyra knelt beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. "We did it." James looked up at her, a faint smile breaking through his exhaustion. "Does this mean I get a break now?" She laughed, her eyes glistening with tears of relief. "For now, but your journey is far from over." James nodded, his chest swelling with a strange sense of pride. He had come here searching for adventure, but he had found something far greater: purpose, connection, and a legacy worth fighting for. As the ruins settled into silence, the heart pulsed faintly, a beacon of hope for the future. And for the first time, James felt like he truly belonged.